Nearly every scholar and every preacher, they talk about this parable that you just heard read, points to the persistence, the need for persistence in prayer. And why not? I mean, that's what the very first verse says. Jesus told them a parable about their need to pray always and not to lose heart. But note, this is Luke's introductory comment. And it's apparently how he and then the early church interpreted this parable. But without that sentence, without having the supposed purpose of the story given to us ahead of time, you can draw a lot of other teachings from this parable. In fact, I dare to say Luke missed the point entirely. Yeah, really. Now, I love to preach and read the parables. And one of the reasons is the fact they are wide open to interpretation. There is seldom just a single message to be learned or gained from the reading. And depending on what's happening in our own lives or in the world situation, parables will provoke all kinds of different responses and different meanings. And that seems to have been Jesus' intention. They're open for us to make our own discoveries based on what's going on in our world and in our lives. Here's one person's description of a parable. Jesus gave us parables as a process through which we not only hear about the experiences of God, but actually share them. As we enter into the world of God and not be mere observers who analyze the situation from a safe distance. Parables are stories of ordinary people and events which provide a context for the extraordinary, through which we experience the challenge of God reversing values in our tidy schemes. Okay? Let's enter into today's parable for today, that we might become participants. We might become that widow or that judge or God. And just see what happens. And let's begin the process by thinking for a few moments about the power of persistence. Example 1. Several years ago, this statement appeared on the front page of what was then called the Milwaukee Journal. Computer printouts show Chevrolet routinely offers secret warranties on some defects in which only the consumers who complain loudly enough get them fixed for free. Example 2. Well, I lived in a Oconomowoc after leaving this church years ago. Many years ago. The mayor, Floss Whalen, organized the Squeaky Wheel Committee, as she called it, to keep after our state government about completing Highway 16 between Okauchee and Oconomowoc. And it came about. Example 3, there was a church member of mine in Appleton, that was after Oconomowoc, who took out a 3-month membership, trial membership in the YMCA of Appleton, and then discovered the Y was going to be closed for renovations for almost that entire 3-month period of time. So she went to the Y, office after office after office, insisting she was entitled to a refund. She pointed out the injustice of the situation, and making such a scene, eventually a portion of her money was refunded, though very reluctantly and with a degree of anger expressed toward her. And do I need to remind us all what happens at grocery stores? I mean, just stand in a grocery store for 3 or 4 minutes and just observe how children, with their parents, bombard them with requests until mom or dad finally says, "Oh, all right. Here, now, I don't want to hear another word out of you." And then they put into the cart the very items they had refused to give the child the first 5 or 6 times he or she asked. I can tell, yep. We've all done it, too. Here's a quote from an autobiography. Early in life, I learned that if you want something, you better make some noise. That was Malcolm X said that. But it could have been the man banging on the neighbor's door at midnight because he needed food in one of Jesus' stories. And check it out, Luke chapter 11. Or it could have been this persistent widow. She's certainly a symbol, an example of all those who are poor and powerless and defenseless. Now, a widow's status in Israel was precarious. She could easily be exposed to exploitations of many kinds. The Hebrew word for widow refers to someone who is silent, without a voice, without the ability to speak. Because in Hebrew society, women were not permitted to speak in public on their own behalf. And so here's a woman without a husband or a relative, male relative, to speak for her. That person was extremely vulnerable, in a vulnerable position. She had few rights, and the few she did have often were not respected. Often she was forced to rely upon other people's charity. And despite this, maybe because she didn't have anything to lose, the widow in Jesus' story refuses to give up until she's received justice. But Jesus had great compassion for widows. Maybe it's because his mother was a widow. Maybe that's why he scolded the Pharisees for their injustice toward widows. Maybe that's why he singled out for praise a poor widow who put her final 2 copper coins in the offering plate. Well, not plate, box. Maybe that's why he told that story. Or maybe that's why he told this story. It was simply, maybe it was just because Jesus was so in touch with the nature of God, his heavenly parent. Somewhere or another, I picked up the fact that the word widow in newspaper terminology refers to the short last line, something that's left over at the end of a story in print, and you got to deal with it some way or another. That's a widow. And that's exactly the way a lot of widows felt. That's exactly the way a lot of widows still feel. Kind of left over. But this particular widow used her only resources. The knowledge she knew she had been was right and she had been wronged, and the persistence and energy and courage to pursue her rights for justice, even in the midst of public humiliation. So she was at the courtyard when the judge was there. She waylaid him as he went home. Maybe she even woke him up in the morning. Wherever he might go, she was there, pleading for attention, pleading for justice, pleading to be heard. I suspect the friends of the judge began to laugh at him because of the situation. He couldn't avoid her. He couldn't shut her up. And there were no court-ordered restraining orders in the judicial system in that day. Today, she'd probably be locked up and arrested as a stalker. So finally, the judge says, because of all this trouble this woman is giving me, I'll see to it that she gets her rights and eventually receive the justice which she should have had. Because the book of Deuteronomy reports Moses' charge to all judges. Give the members of your community a fair hearing. Judge rightly between one person and another, whether citizen or resident alien. You must not be partial in judging. Hear out the small and the great alike, for the judgment is God's. Now, this is one of these how much more messages that Jesus used quite often to describe his heavenly parent. So let's leave the widow now for a moment and focus on this judge. And when we do that, then we can see the contrast between the judge and the character of God, who in many biblical texts serves as the just judge over Israel. Jesus, therefore, is pointing out that even if an unjust judge, a corrupt judge, will heed the widow and do what is right, how much more will God seek to bring justice to the poor and the oppressed? How much more? Will not God, the champion of the poor, grant them the justice for which they pray and seek continually? And God doesn't have to be coerced. God doesn't have to be talked into it somehow. So this, you see, is a message of hope, not only to those who are widows and widowers, but to all who are powerless, or lost, or ignored, or who have no voice, or who feel trapped by life, by circumstance. And maybe it's also a warning for the rest of us, those in the positions of power, like the judge. Jesus is presenting the disciples, and I believe us, with a vision of a new age when the oppressed will be vindicated. He's making a statement about liberation and freedom and what side God takes. Whose side God's on? Ooh. In fact, we find here an affirmation of that vision that Mary had for her son Jesus. He will lift up the lowly, fill the hungry with good things, and bring down the proud from their thrones. All of us can identify with the widow, I think, at those times when we're hurting, when we feel powerless, maybe even when we just want to talk to a live human being on the phone and not get put on hold or get a recording. But I hope that every one of us will also experience God, the God who's on our side in battles for justice and right. In fact, here's another way to interpret this parable. We could compare God to the widow who never gives up until justice finally comes, or the shepherd who never gives up until the last lamb has been found. See, God is the persistent one who keeps on loving us, who keeps on seeking mercy and justice, no matter what. God's will prevail. It will come on earth, come as it is in heaven. And so God and the widow and we are united. We are to be united in our battles against the unjust judges of the world who oppose God's will. So as I said, it's really a message of hope, a message of God's persistence. And that's certainly a needed message today when there's so much going on in this world that can cause us to grow discouraged, lose hope, and give up. Let's pray. Oh, gracious God, we do need to be reminded how much more your love extends, how much more you love us, how much more you desire justice, love, and caring in such a needy world.